love, love, until I feel that breath of thy spirit flowing in me.
Hello, welcome to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Kerryn Redpath. She's a former drug user and currently a drug educator. Welcome, Kerryn.
Thank you, Geraldine.
It's great to have you at the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to know more about your faith story, how you became someone with faith.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't always have a faith. I grew up in a loving family with a really good childhood. Actually, I was sporty from the moment I first laid eyes on horses. I fell madly in love with horses, and my dad bought a speedboat. I did water skiing. I went to good schools, had lots of friends.
Wow.
But in my teenage years, I sort of wanted to fit in, followed the crowd, and I was pretty shy as a teenager. And I got into the party scene, and unfortunately for me, what that ended up being was drug using. And look, I thought I was just having a bit of fun. When I look back, I can see some of the tough times that I actually lived through in that journey. And at the age of 25, I actually developed drug-related heart and kidney failure. I nearly died several times. It took quite a while to diagnose it. So by the time they realised just how ill I was actually raced into the Alfred Hospital, and I was given less than 2 hours to live.
Wow.
And I'd been sent to Sunday school as a kid, but Mum and Dad didn't go. It was just the thing to do. I've got lovely parents, but it was just the done thing. And I didn't really gain a lot from it personally. So at this point, when I was in hospital, my brother had been a Christian for some years, and he used to tell me about this Jesus bloke.
Right.
And I used to, no, I'm right. I'm living the life. I don't need that.
Yeah.
But now here I was in hospital, almost dead, with heart and kidney failure.
Was that to do with the drug use that caused the...
Well, what happened was I contracted hepatitis B, and my antibodies malfunctioned and attacked my body. And because it was reasonably rare, it took... nearly 6 months till I nearly died, and they discovered how ill I was, and it wasn't just the Hep B, it was complications. One of the things that I have discovered more recently with the research and stuff that I've done is that smoking marijuana can affect your autoimmune system. And, I'm not proud of anything I did in the past, but I did smoke a lot of marijuana, which led to it opens the doors to other drugs, lots of other drugs. And that can affect your autoimmune system, and it's quite likely that that's why I had a malfunction of my autoimmune system when I contracted hepatitis B. Anyway, I was a lot of people prayed for me that night that I was expected to die. In fact, a few hundred, and miraculously I survived. And it wasn't until a few years later that I actually found a faith in God. And I don't know if you want to talk about how that happened now or a bit later. But
it'd be great to hear about how you came to a faith.
Well, I was told I would never have any children because I'd had my heart miraculously recovered in the first week that I was in hospital. It was so enlarged, it was beating 300 to 400 times a minute. My kidney function was less than a 5% function in both kidneys, and they expected me to die at any time. They said I needed a heart transplant, but my kidney function was too poor. You wouldn't get a heart in 2 hours anyway.
Yeah.
So my kidneys wouldn't have survived the surgery. So my survival was quite miraculous. When I'd been in hospital for about 7 days, my doctors were kind of, scratching their heads wondering why I was still alive, and I had another scan of my heart, and I had 3 different specialists come to me the day after when the results came through and say, "This is amazing. That's not the same heart. It's like you have a new heart."
Wow.
But my kidney function took a lot longer to recover, and I spent almost 5 months in the Alfred Hospital in Melbourne.
Wow, that's a long time.
And I had grand mal seizures, comas. I had to be resuscitated at least once or twice. It was a really, really tough time, and I was told I would never have any children. And I was devastated. It wasn't the plan. I'd always thought, one day I'd meet someone, settle down and have a family, and I was just devastated. And I went against my doctor's advice, and I lost some babies, and I had a baby, but my kidneys failed, and it was touch and go for him and me. When he was 12 months old, I was invited to a miracle meeting, and by that point I'd started to really feel like I wanted to have another child. I wanted my son to have a brother or sister.
Oh, right.
But by this point I had 40% function in both kidneys,
Wow.
which isn't very good. And if my kidneys were to fail again in another pregnancy, I could die and leave my son without a mum. So I was kind of desperate, and I went along to this meeting called a miracle meeting, which sounded a bit weird to me, but because I wasn't a believer. And I sat in there, listened to this lady share her testimony, and she spoke of how she had had heart and kidney failure and God had healed her.
Wow.
And I just, couldn't believe my ears. Like I felt like someone was pointing straight at me. Like I'd had heart and kidney failure, and I wondered who else in the room might have been in that position. Probably no one else. And I went up nervously up the front for prayer, and I poured out all of my problems, and she prayed for me, and I just felt this love, this touch of God like love just flow through my whole body, and I just burst into tears. And that was the day that I chose to follow Jesus. That was the 17th of July 1985. So that was the beginning of my faith journey. Yeah.
Wow, 1985.
Yeah,
it's
quite a while
amazing.
ago.
And about the miracle in your life. We probably need to go for a break now.
Yeah. Okay.
You're watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us and we'll be back after the break. Hello, welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Kerryn Redpath. She's a drug and alcohol educator. Welcome back, Kerryn.
Thank you.
Yeah, you were sharing very inspiringly the story about a miracle prayer group that you went to.
Yeah, it was called a miracle meeting. It was actually held in a small room at the Dandenong Town Hall. And not only did I feel an incredible touch of God, just my body just welled up with love. Like I'd been through drug addiction, near-death illness, months and months in hospital, having a baby where my kidneys failed. And I was there for prayer for healing of my kidneys. I just wanted to have another baby. And incredibly, my kidney function while I was in hospital over that 5 months went from less than 5% function up to 40%, and in 40% both kidneys, both very scarred. When I had my caesarean with my first son, emergency caesarean, they looked at my kidneys and they said they were small and shriveled and looked like walnuts. And having children was really tricky. So I had this prayer, and not only did I feel a touch of God and choose to follow Jesus that day, but over the next 3 weeks, for the first time in 3 years, my kidney function began to improve.
Wow.
And my kidneys are now just outside of normal, the function.
Incredible.
And I've been blessed with 2 more beautiful children. So I have 2 boys and a girl, all grown up and healthy and all married now. And
That's incredible.
I just feel like I'm one of the most blessed people in the world, mums in the world, because I was never expected to have children at all.
The doctor said that you couldn't have children, and that's amazing.
Yep, absolute miracle.
Yeah, I have a nursing background, so I realised how difficult it would have been.
Yeah.
But you're a walking miracle.
Yep, and somehow God, I think, just held my kidneys in His hands, but I'm doing reasonably,
That's
very
fantastic.
well now. Yeah.
And from that experience, you started to really grow in your faith in God?
Absolutely. It was a journey. I actually did a course early on called Growing in Christ, and gave me a real grounding in it. And I'm just overwhelmed with the love and the grace and the forgiveness that I've been shown. The mercy. He's a very merciful God. I'd made bad choices and broken the law, done all sorts of things that I shouldn't have done, and here was a God saying, no, I'll give you another chance. I love you, and that's not the life I have for you. And I haven't touched an illicit drug for well over 30 years now. So
that's amazing. So when you said you broke the law, is that to do with your drug use?
Just using drugs. It's illegal to use. They were illicit drugs that I was using. I actually had a full-time office job while I was using drugs, and I thought I was coping well, the functioning drug user. But when I look back, I wasn't functioning anywhere near as well as I thought you could. I think that's a pretty bit of an oxymoron saying functioning drug user. Yeah.
And when you got touched by Jesus, you just put away the drugs completely and gave your life to God?
I hadn't used drugs for a little while anyway, because the illness, 5 months in hospital, was kind of like a rehab for me. But I was tempted a few times because other people around me were still using drugs. But I just didn't ever feel the desire again after filling that hole with God. You know,
That's amazing.
Even though I had a happy childhood and felt loved, I guess it was just something that made me feel confident, or made me feel like I fitted in, and I just no longer needed it because God filled that space. Yeah,
that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And from that experience, you decided to become a drug educator?
I didn't actually decide. I didn't set out to do this. What happened was, some years later, after my children had grown up to sort of young adults, I felt really compelled to write my story into a book, and I actually had a prophecy that was speaking in that direction and that guided me in that direction. And after I wrote the book, and it just sort of poured out of me, and after I wrote this book, which is my first one, Out of the Darkness, a school teacher read my book and contacted me and invited me to speak at the school where he taught, and I was absolutely terrified of public speaking, as so many people are. But I realised one day, you know, this is not about me. I've got quite a message here, and that's where it started. And I just did a few here and there, and then I had to give away my work to fit in time to do more. And over the last 10 years, I've been speaking in schools and some businesses around Australia with my message. It's a tough field, but you know, for every child or adult who might say no to drugs or reach out for help because of my message, it makes it worth it. Yeah,
that's wonderful, because you know, to actually do that and to you know, because being a former drug user, people will, like, you know, really listen to you, you know, and
absolutely.
And remember that, you know, like, because sometimes when young people don't have anyone speak into their lives, they don't have a good message, but you have a good message.
Well, I've got the horror stories. I've, you know, seen so many horrible things over the years, and I know the dark side of drugs, and young people do want to hear the reality, you know, there's a bit of a message out there at the moment, you know, just minimise harm and do it safely, and of course we want to minimise harm, but I believe demand reduction is the area that I work in, which is an area of doing my best to help prevent uptake of drug use, and also at the area of recovery. So if you can have less people using drugs by never taking it up, or by reaching out for help and recovering, you're going to have less drug use and less of a problem in society, and that's the area I'm working in. So
wow,
yeah, and I've helped a few people into rehab as well, which is, it's a tough journey, but it's so rewarding when people do succeed.
I mean, to walk with someone and to support someone is a wonderful thing to do, and you support quite a few people, don't you?
I have over the years, you know, we've got a really big problem at the moment with ice. It's a powerfully addictive drug and destructive, and it destroys brain cells, and it's very, very hard to get people to get into. They've got a detox and then rehab, and it's really hard to get someone to follow through because their brain's been, you know, and their thinking has been altered because of the effects of the chemicals on their brain. And it's a really tough journey, but recovery is possible, and there's some, you know, wonderful stories of people recovering from all sorts of drug use.
I heard that some parts of the brain, the receptors get destroyed, and they get a lot of anxiety, and some get delusions.
Yep. Well, with a drug, particularly like ice or methamphetamine, it releases such a huge amount of dopamine being a feel-good chemical in your brain that your brain naturally releases when you're feeling happy, or, you know, in love, that sort of thing, laughing, you know, watching a movie, a comedy or something like that. When you have methamphetamine or ice, it releases so much of this stuff that over time people it damages the dopamine transporter in the brain, and people no longer feel a natural high because it releases so much, and someone will use the drug and feel on top of the world, but then they come down to a very, very depressing low. So they either stop using or want to use more, and over time it damages the dopamine transporters, and people then no longer feel normal high when they use the drug, and they're addicted to using it just to feel normal. It's very, very destructive, and very hard to come down off. Yeah,
it's a very interesting point you've given.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll go for a break. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay with us, and we'll be back after the break. Welcome back to Spirit of Life. My name is Geraldine Lee, your host, and our guest is Kerryn Redpath. She's a drug and alcohol educator. Welcome back, Kerryn.
Thank you.
You have a lot of knowledge about drugs, and you were talking about ice. And what do you think about marijuana? Many people say that they're trying to push for legalization. What do you think about marijuana?
Marijuana over the years has been called a soft drug, but it's not soft. I mean, like I said, I'm not proud of anything I did in the past, so anything I say is just the reality. I smoked a lot of marijuana, which opened the door to other drugs. These days, apparently, it's way stronger, way higher in THC, the component that causes you to be stoned and the component that can lead to psychosis. And as far as I'm concerned, it is a gateway drug. There's been research done. Most people who use hard drugs, or they're all hard, but say heroin or ice or GHB or ketamine, they usually start on marijuana. There's also MDMA, which is ecstasy. There's so many drugs on the market, and it's a money-making business. There's people out there selling drugs to try and make money, and they don't care about the users' health, family, their future,
destruction,
and those things. Yeah. So for me personally, it was marijuana and then hallucinogenic drugs that opened the door to that, because you're hanging around people using drugs, and there's people getting in touch, contact with other drug users, and it's so easy once you've crossed that line. You've dropped your guard, you've crossed the line into taking mind-altering substances. It's so easy to say yes to other drugs. So then I got into, I was never going to use what I considered hard drugs, but a friend visited once and told me that they'd been using heroin, and not wanting to be left out. I thought, curious, I'd like to try it, and I went down that path and using needles, speed, and it's frightening what's out there.
What do you say to a parent whose child is starting on marijuana and starting drugs? What would you, how would you help a parent?
Yeah, it's so tough as a parent, because the peer pressure, even though you're not necessarily pressured up, for me it was pressure on yourself wanting to fit in. Look, they need to hear the truth about it. They need to hear the reality about what drugs can cause and where they can go. This is the reality. It's costing, our rehabs are full to overflowing. Our prisons are full of people in there because of drug or alcohol related crimes that they've become involved in. It's a problem across society. It's costing so much money. You mentioned legalisation. In states in America, they've legalised marijuana in many states, and we've actually just found that there's more than ever, there's a really huge increase in the number of black market marijuana growers, and they're also destroying the environment where they grow them. They use chemicals. They go into like national parks, deep into the forest, and use up water. They call it water depletion, and leave behind just destruction and growing thousands and thousands of plants. And these are black market, because they want to cash in on what they're calling the green rush. But they don't want to pay the taxes. So the policing has to do two levels then, the legal and the illegal. And, you legalise something, you're going to have more use.
Yes, that's the reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
And what would, besides the parents telling the child that this is very dangerous, what else should they say to the child,
Well, I believe in, look, they need to know the reality. They need to read as much as they can about it if possible. This is what I try to do in my education, in my book and so forth, and there's lots of other people out there that know the reality of drug use, and you don't have to have used drugs to be a good drug and alcohol awareness educator. but I come from a place that people really want to listen. But if a parent has a child using drugs, look, I really believe in the tough love angle, to really do the best to try and
Yes.
teach them right from wrong,
and don't lend them money, and
don't give them money, don't give in to that, because it's and when children are older, like we've got children in their 20s and 30s, living at home still using drugs and living off mum and dad, sometimes it's time to say, okay, you need to stand on your own 2 feet, because you can find that in your attempt to help them, you're actually enabling them. And it doesn't mean, I'm here for you. You don't ever stop being, if ever you need me, but I'm not going to support what you're doing.
That's right. You can pay
because
for their
it's so
food.
destructive.
You can pay for their food and their clothing, but not for their drugs.
But not just hand over cash if you've got a child who's using drugs. It's a really tough one. Parents have such a dilemma because they love their children. And
and I suppose your life experiencing God was like that high, where there's no side effects.
Absolutely. Like, I just don't miss any of that at all. I much prefer having a clear head. You've got a bit more, you waste a lot of money on drugs as well. And, I actually overdosed a few times too and could have died. I had one particularly bad overdose where I had to be resuscitated. And
that's awful.
and I also resuscitated other people. I had one where my partner overdosed and it took me nearly 40 minutes by myself in the middle of the night to resuscitate him, and I thought he'd gone. I actually gave up at one point, and in sheer terror, I didn't know proper CPR. I just gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. So when you read the statistics of overdoses, they only count the ones where people have called ambulances. But there's a lot of people that have come so close, but they've just managed to resuscitate them, that don't come into that statistic. There's a lot more going on out there than what's covered in the media.
Yeah, there's so much to know, and you know so much from your experience. Because we're coming to the end of the show, would you be able to tell us about your book? Because then people can find out more information about drug use.
Do you want me to
pick
it up?
Out of the Darkness?
So the first one I've written is called Out of the Darkness. I won a little award for that one. And this one's got my whole spiritual journey. It's got the horror stories of the things that I went through in the drug use and nearly dying and the months in hospital. But it's got the amazing story of the turnaround with my faith and God's healing, miraculous healing, my 3 beautiful, precious children. So that's Out of the Darkness. And then I've written a second book, which is called Chasing After the Wind. And this one is more... That's a biblical quote there from Ecclesiastes, but it's actually more about more of a secular version, and it's got a lot more information in it about drugs, because I want to reach people whether they have a faith or not. I love sharing my faith, but we've got a problem amongst people across the...
Kerryn, that's amazing. 2 books, Chasing the Wind and Out of Darkness. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we'd like to have you back next week.
I'd love to.
Oh, great. You've been watching Spirit of Life. Stay tuned next week. Goodbye and God bless you.
Bring it to birth and blow where you will. Blow, blow, blow till I be but breath of the Spirit.